Ah, Thanksgiving, a time for friends and family to get together and enjoy some good food, all after hauling their asses 300 miles through traffic to get to the festivities. And each gathering has their own customs, traditions, and of course, talking points to avoid when Uncle Bert shows up 3 hours late smelling like a distillery. And next to explaining to Grandma what I do for a living, finding a movie to watch that's most in theme with the holiday has always been a challenge for me this time of year. So I figure instead, let's talk about something that's more in the spirit of Thanksgiving. Particularly the part where you take something that was supposed to be sweet and wholesome and rip it to shreds by unearthing the inconvenient truth at the center of the tale. So I present to you today's festive discussion, The Blind Side. A movie that at a time was beloved as a heartwarming tale about overcoming adversity through the power of love and found family. Only to look back now and think, you know what, that might not be the message you'd be left with today. So what happened to The Blind Side? How did this movie about a rising football star and Michael Oher impact the world of pop culture as well as the man himself? And what can we learn from this film's success? And, more importantly, the many shortcomings of this Oscar bait drama. And yes, it technically does count as a Thanksgiving movie because look, they're celebrating it right here. So put on your exploratory pilgrim hats and remember that this video was recorded on stolen land, and let's discuss. The Blind Side was released in 2009 and was directed by John Lee Hancock. I swear it's a real name and not just an alias he goes by. And it is an adaptation of the book The Blind Side: Evolution of the Game, written by Michael Lewis, based on the story of Michael Oher. And is the tale of an aspiring football player who, look, I'm just gonna read the IMDb page so you know exactly what this movie thought it was. The story of Michael Oher, a homeless and traumatized boy who becomes an All-American football player and first-round NFL draft pick with the help of a caring woman and her family. And though Oher would have a successful run after joining the NFL, the movie and book it was based on were created before he had officially been drafted. So whereas other biopics focus on famous people who have already had a successful run, this movie is actually interesting in the fact that it does not focus primarily on the thing he's most famous for. Mainly because at the time it was made, it hadn't happened yet. So funny enough, there's actually very little football in this movie, only having one full scene dedicated to the sport. It's primarily a feel-good family drama, with some Rocky-style training montages thrown in. Speaking of throwing things in, why don't you guys throw in a like, comment, and maybe even subscribe to this channel? Definitely would make me more thankful this time of year. And speaking of good things, while I alluded to that this film does have its fair share of problems, and we will be getting to those very shortly, I first want to point out some of the qualities that I did find quite well done in this little production. First off, the shot selection is immaculate in this film. Every image seems well crafted and intentional, rather than feel like it was just shot for coverage so we could see every angle of a scene. Incredible care is paid to the blocking and set design to make this world feel like a real and believable place, with a little bit of artistic flair thrown in. I particularly like these shots where you see the characters in the mirrors, talking to one another, allowing us to see both sides of the conversation play out, as well as the characters' individual expressions. They also do an incredible job highlighting the scale of Michael. Being 6'5" and over 300 pounds, he is a massive figure, and the film never fails to demonstrate this in the frame. Towering over many of his co-stars, while also still managing to capture all of Quentin Aaron's subtle and emotional performance decisions, making it incredibly easy to sympathize with him. In fact, the performances all around are incredible. Sandra Bullock really does embody that warm motherly nature with a stern, tough-as-nails attitude, and I feel like she does capture the character of Leanne for both the good qualities and what we'll be getting to shortly, the less than inspiring ones. I also love the saturation and color in this film. It's very easy on the eyes, and it gives so much life to the slither of the American heartland. And finally, the music is full of a bunch of fun, catchy tracks, but also do a good job to carry you throughout this adventure. Nothing ever felt out of place, and it all comes together to make this beautiful work of art, which manages to maintain its integrity up until the moment that the characters open their mouth.
You're changing that boy's life.
No, he's changing mine.
Oh, brother, this guy's
Seen The Blind Side with Sandy Bullock.
Yeah, the honeymoon phase wasn't gonna last that long. Because while the overall production and craft that was put into this film is incredibly admirable, and the talent is on full display, the story itself is really where we find a lot of problems, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this thing well and truly misses the mark of the message that it is trying to preach. Or at least I hope that's what happened, because oh boy. Obviously the story of this film is revolving around racial dynamics and internal prejudices that keep the community divided. And I do think this movie does want to make some progress in the direction of a world devoid of bigotry and hate, but when watching it back, I don't think it accomplished that. We'll start with one of the first blunders this film makes, and that's in the character of Michael himself. The film has this issue where it depicts Michael incredibly childishly. Like, the infantilization of the young Michael Oher is remarkably reductive and, dare I say, offensive. Or at least I'd be offended if this is how I was portrayed. Not only they treat him like he's got the mind of a child, but more just flat out stupid. From the way he draws a boat on the back of his tests, to getting distracted by a balloon on a football field, which is typical green balloon behavior. Oh no, am I also part of the problem?
Balloons! They're balloons!
I mean, we're looking at Joey Tribbiani level of childlike behavior. You know, the later seasons.
Joey doesn't share food!
With this gentle giant persona that seems less like an actual person and more like a sidekick in a Disney adventure. From his love of children's stories to his immaturity and desire to do nothing but play video games with his best friend, who also happens to be like an 11-year-old boy, Michael is not just depicted as a little bit slower than the average high school kid, but he is basically just a child in a grown man's body. Kind of like that movie Big or Shazam, but without any of the magic that facilitated those events. In addition, his lack of agency is incredibly notable due to the fact that he never really gets a chance to make any decisions for himself. The film is constantly putting the burden of what Michael's next move is going to be on the supporting characters, namely Leanne Tui, the mother figure who will be joining us along this tale. Nearly every decision he makes is in favor of what the Tui family desire, even his choice to take up football to begin with. The story just feels like it's uplifting Leanne by downplaying Michael. In fact, we're not just downplaying Michael, this movie has a major problem of downplaying the black community as a whole, in favor of uplifting the white characters and focusing on what they contributed to Michael's life. Because nowhere in this film will you find any positive depiction of black culture or black people in general. Michael throughout this entire story is constantly being pulled in whatever direction the Tui family desire, and never gets a chance to explore his identity or his relationship between these two worlds. And the black characters in general just don't get anywhere near the same level of sympathy and time dedicated to them as their white counterparts. The film presents plenty of wretched and unkind white characters, but even the worst of them are never as poorly portrayed, anywhere near as bad as the folks from Michael's old neighborhood. It really does feel like the film views Michael as having been rescued from his minority origins, and given the opportunity to thrive amongst what the film depicts as a much more refined culture. And that's not just me reading too much into this. The film pretty much just outright states that had Leanne not intervened in Michael's life, then he would have more than likely have died, like we see happen to another character in this film.
He'd been killed in a gang fight at Hurt Village. They talked about his superb athletic skills. It could have been my son Michael.
And for a film about race and how it has created such economic divides, the movie is completely uninterested in the systemic problems that have caused these communities to be left behind. I mean, for crying out loud, the Tui family owns like 100 different fast food restaurants.
85.
But never does the film ask if these franchise joints are sapping the money out of these lower income areas. We never look into any of the factors that might have caused the minority communities to be pushed to the other side of the train tracks, or why their schools are so underfunded, and yet these white Christian schools seem to get all the money in the world. Instead, it's all just treated as a matter of fact, as though it's baked into our human nature. And yeah, I know it's a little bit heady and political, but like, if there ever was a story that would look into these topics, this is it. But all in all, this movie just has a really weird relationship with the racial dynamics at play. But how was it received upon release? Well, while on a budget of $29 million, this film managed to gross over $300 million worldwide. And it was even nominated for a number of different awards, including up for the running for Best Picture in the Oscars. And though it didn't win in this category,
The Hurt Locker.
Sandra Bullock herself did take home the Oscar for Best Actress that year. And beyond this, people all over the world just fell in love with this story.
I would like to be the single mother of an athletically gifted teen boy who I can help to reach his full Division I scholarship potential. Preferably African American.
Like The Blindside, like the movie, right?
Though this might have further revealed the ignorance and disconnect both viewers and the filmmakers themselves experienced with the subject matter. And now with some hindsight and distance, along with a plethora of more critical eyes with their own unique perspectives, this film is no longer remembered as the steps in the right direction it was applauded as, but rather a victory lap to a job not yet completed. And not only does bigotry still exist, but even this film can be described as, I don't want to say racist.
It's racist.
Well, there you have it. And while many of the people involved in the story of this film have spoken out positively about it, there was one individual who had a less than warm reception to this movie's release. And it is none other than the star of the movie itself, Michael Oher. Because despite what the film would have you believe, this story is, well, this is exactly real. In reality, the events in this movie are incredibly embellished and paint the whole thing as something of a fantasy. While the term white savior is thrown around when discussing this movie,
Is this some sort of white guilt thing?
you can't really argue with it. The movie heavily alters real-life events in order to paint its narrative as that of a troubled young man with severe learning disabilities who was inevitably going to be forgotten by the annals of history until he was given a shot by a wealthy and charitable couple who set him on the path of greatness. But that's not how it actually went down. The reality is that Michael was already a talented athlete from jump, being part of his school's football team as early as his freshman year. In fact, he had already been scouted out by many talent agents far earlier than the film would lead you to believe. He was already named Division II or 2A Lineman of the Year in 2003, and rated 5 stars by recruits, earning him the distinction as the number 5 offensive lineman prospect in the country. But they had to change it because the reality would not line up with the kindly caregiver story that the movie runs with. So they made Michael meeker, more timid, quiet, and less intelligent.
Suffering from brain damage is something do very well. Michael Clark Duncan in Green Mile, Cuba Gooden Jr. in Radio, and that big black from The Blind Side.
I know the movie tries to push the idea that he's not dumb, he just learns a little differently, but the way they go about it just makes him seem like he's mentally 11 years old. And I repeat, his best friend is an 11-year-old, and the movie would have you believe that he acts more mature than Michael does. They also end up cutting out many members of his supporting circle. Michael in reality bounced from foster home to foster home, and while not staying in exactly the lap of luxury, in fact even experiencing a few bouts of homelessness, he had still slept in a bed before, in fact that's something foster homes are legally required to provide, as well as had some existing support network, all of which are just pretty much cut from the movie. And there were a number of different family members and friends involved in shaping Michael into the man he'd become, along with a lot of hard work of his own he had to put in. But the movie would make you think that it's all thanks to the Tuohys. Even the decision to play football was recommended to him by them, and even showed them having to slowly explain the rules to him using tricks and metaphors.
Tony here's your quarterback, all right? You protect his blind side. When you look at him, you think of me.
How you have my back, how you have his, okay? Yes, ma'am.
It's really quite condescending, and strips away his agency in contrast to how things really played out. Even how he ended up living with the Tuohys in the movie made it seem like a leap of faith that Leanne is taking on a complete stranger. Whereas the truth is, they not only knew who Michael was, but only officially asked him to move in with them after he was already being scouted. How convenient. The film itself actually draws attention to this possible legal overreach with the family and Michael. You see, the school that he attended, the University of Mississippi, well, the Tuohys just so happened to be boosters for this school, meaning that they put a substantial amount of money into their alma mater. So naturally, the NCAA stepped in order to investigate whether or not there was any abuse at play. And while in reality this is quite reasonable to do, the movie depicts it as something of a hostile takedown of the relationship between Michael and the Tuohys, and paints the investigator as something of an antagonist who simply doesn't understand the love that this family shares. And it ends with Michael affirming that he wants to go to school, not really for himself, but because that's what his family does.
Because it's where my family goes to school.
Well, that doesn't make things much better. It just feels kind of tone deaf, like the film doesn't realize what it's saying, which is amplified by the fact that they treat this whole affair like it's some kind of a sweet moment. And this leads us to the other legal complication after he joins the NFL. Because going off of this movie and Michael's own testimonies, you would be led to believe that before attending the University of Mississippi, the Tuohys had officially adopted Michael, paperwork and all. But that's not actually the case. While the Tuohys were in some part responsible for Michael, it was only in one particular aspect: his money. Signing a conservatorship, which basically gives them the authority to manage a person's financial affairs, did tie Michael to the family, but to whose benefit? Especially after his football career was taking off, and this resulted in Michael filing lawsuits against the family in 2023, alleging that this agreement allowed the family to make millions off of his name and story, including The Blind Side itself, a film which he claimed made the family millions, but for which he only received $138,000 for. And while the family claimed they only got $700,000 from the film, which is nearly $600,000 more than what he made off of his own damn story, still doesn't factor in all the business deals and publicity that they profited off of in the years to come. Michael also alleged that he wasn't made clear as to the difference between a conservatorship and outright adoption, a distinction I myself and many in the real world wouldn't have known had they not researched it. And I've got a lot easier access to the internet than Michael did back then. In fact, even in the movie, the word adoption is only ever said twice. Once as a joke and once as an affirmation that that's not something they can do. And yet, that scene at the dinner table where they say, "Would you like to be part of the family?" Well, you'd think that they were at that point adopting him, right? But they never said legally. I'm not pointing any fingers, but if I were trying to give myself an out, this is how I'd do it. And it all creates this mess that ends up leading me to believe that despite their claims that they had Michael's best interests at heart, they clearly took advantage of him while he was in a vulnerable place, and neglected to give him very important information. Doesn't help by the fact that this film is kind of propaganda in the Tuohy's favor. And the case is still ongoing to this day, with Michael's conservatorship having been terminated in September of 2023. So sadly, despite the positive ending that the film leaves you with, the reality of the situation is anything but inspiring for Michael. So kind of a bummer way to end things, right? This movie, believed by so many to be ahead of the curve, is actually antiquated and stands as a reminder as to how much work still needs to be done. But luckily, it does seem like things are working out for Michael. First of all, good call on his part for getting a criminal justice degree, and he has since married his longtime partner, and they now have 4 kids together. He also is smart with his money and claims that he has set aside a good chunk of change to live off of now that his football career has come to an end. And hey, he did win a Super Bowl, so he certainly saw his fair share of success whilst part of the NFL. But yeah, even though it does look like there's a lot that still needs to be settled, it's good to know that the film itself has been limited in how much more harm it can do. Because nowadays, plenty of people recognize that it was much more damaging in the long run than it probably intended to be. And we look back on it with a mocking sense of reflection that it very clearly missed the mark on what it was trying to achieve.
I'm not giving off too much of a Blindside vibe, am I?
As if that's a bad thing?
But that's what I got for you today. And in the end, I'm just happy to do my part in partaking the time-honored tradition of giving everyone out there something more to argue about while watching the Thanksgiving game. Alright, happy holidays, folks. Hey, thanks for watching, and if you stuck all the way to the end, why don't you check out another one of our videos on screen now. And if you want to chat directly, come join our Discord, link in the description below.